Good morning. In the shadow of the Ukraine conflict, European countries have turned increasingly to the United States for military supplies. Over the past 5 years, the US has supplied more than 64% of Europe's arms imports, a stark increase from previous years. This deepening dependence raises critical questions about Europe's capacity to achieve defense independence. How can Europe balance its strategic alliance with the need to strengthen its own defense industry, and what are the broader implications of its reliance on the American arms? Welcome to In Depth. European defense stocks are experiencing a surge as the EU aims to enhance its military capabilities amid concerns over the reliability of US arms support, particularly under the Trump administration. According to Washington Examiner, historically Europe has depended on US arms, accounting for 2/3 of NATO members' imports. The EU is drafting a white paper to bolster its defense industry, particularly in light of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. As the US shifts its foreign policy to encourage European self-sufficiency, EU leaders are reevaluating their defense strategies to ensure regional security. The Ukraine peace process initiated by Trump administration has sparked panic in Europe about potential US abandonment of NATO allies, prompting urgent discussions on rearmament. Time magazine stated that while increasing military spending is essential, a hasty approach may lead to costly and regrettable decisions. European leaders are considering boosting defense budget to 3 to 5% of GDP, with EU Commissioner President Ursula von der Leyen prioritizing €8 billion for rearmament. Coordinating production among European nations remains a challenge as differing priorities emerge. A measured approach is crucial to maintain European unity and address domestic needs.
In the heart of Europe, a tale of dependency unfolds. Over the past 5 years, the majority of weapons imported by European countries have come from the United States, accounting for a staggering 64%, up from 52% in the previous period. This trend raises pressing questions about Europe's ability to achieve defense industry independence. The reliance on American arms has become a defining feature of European security, but it also poses significant challenges to the continent's aspirations for self-sufficiency. Recent geopolitical shifts, such as the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, which has made Ukraine the world's largest arms importer, the United States has solidified its position as the world's leading arms exporter, with Europe emerging as its primary market for the first time in 2 decades, accounting for 35% of American exports. Meanwhile, France has become the world's second largest arms supplier, though its share remains significantly smaller than that of the United States. This deepening dependence on American weaponry raises concerns about Europe's capacity to strengthen its industry. Despite efforts to cut imports and strengthen domestic production, European nations remain heavily dependent on US arms. The situation is further complicated by the evolving nature of transatlantic relations. While the US remains committed to NATO, there are growing calls for Europe to take greater responsibility for its own defense. As Europe navigates these challenges, it must balance immediate security needs with the long-term goal of defense self-sufficiency. A task made even harder by its deep reliance on American arms.
welcome back. As Europe's reliance on American arms deepen, a pressing question emerged: can the continent break free from this dependence and forge its own path to defense independence? For more analysis, we're joined by Mr. Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official from Brussels, and we are also joined by Mr. Tobias Belgrano, an international relations researcher from Buenos Aires. Good morning to you both, gentlemen, and welcome to Qnews. Let me start here with Mr. Williams. Mr. Williams, why are European NATO members still heavily reliant on US weapons despite efforts to strengthen their own defenses industries?
Well, I think up until 6 weeks ago, with the advent of Mr. Trump as president, the NATO alliance was a collective endeavor led by the United States to deter Russia or any other threats to the alliance, and therefore it was an integrated capability, defense capability, and the US has a stranglehold in terms of direction of the alliance, in terms of the command of the alliance, and in terms of the policy of the alliance. And US arms manufacturing is a single space for their arms sales.
Right. Let me here turn to Mr. Belgrano. Back to answer to speak about what you said here, Mr. Williams. But let me get to Mr. Belgrano first. And what are the risks of Europe relying on US support as a baseline scenario for its defense strategy?
Well, we're seeing the effect of this reliance that Europe has been having to the US, especially after the beginning of the war between the Ukraine and Russia. The imports of arms from Europe to the Europe to the US have increased almost 155% of weapons from the US coming to Europe. So this reliance has caused an impact that if the US, there's a change in US foreign policy or US foreign analysis or worldview, this can affect the capability of defense of Europe. And we are seeing these examples as after the new shift in Trump's new administration, Europe now finds itself in the need to increase its own defense capacity. There are two forms of dependence, of factual dependence of the European armies among the US. That is in capabilities. I mean, many times many spare parts and many spare parts of arms and tanks and weaponry are imported from the US, and also in software and in software integrations. Many of the defense systems include American technology which includes software which must be updated frequently. So in this case, we are seeing how the dependence is now not only in the arms but also in the E+D integration.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to you, Mr. Williams, and I apologize for the connection or the connection that this technical problem that occurred. Back to you, and you were speaking about the command of the US to most of the areas, and this is why the NATO members are still heavily reliant on US weapons, or this is what I understood of what I heard. But that from your point of view, that should put some pressure on the European countries to close the capability gaps in areas like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and missile defense, and also pay more attention to the budget spent on the defense systems, or what do you think here?
Yes, as I was saying, uh, 6 weeks ago, with the advent of President Trump, this defense capability in Europe was monopolized by NATO and led by the United States. And this was a collective endeavor, and no one thought much about it. And the problem is now politicians have woken up to the real dilemma and relying on the United States for almost key capabilities which they don't have. And few weeks has revealed that the politicians don't really understand how much it will take to and how much it will cost to go to a purely autonomous or largely autonomous European capability. The European leaders are waking up to a problem that they ignored as a technical problem, defense, over the past 40 years or so.
Mr. Belgrano, what are the potential consequences of the United States withdrawing its security guarantee for Europe?
Well, I do think that one of the greater risks, despite if in the end of the process the European Union is able to access and produce a defense system that it's capable to defend itself, I believe the biggest risk is fragmentation, because nowadays, despite the European politicians are joining all together in this collective endeavor to defend themselves from the threats that threaten Europe, and they are trying to produce their own defense system. I see in the future and in the short-term political future of Europe an increasing fragmentation and political fragmentation that threatens the unity of the European Union. And if this process of defense, the new defense system, it generates tensions between the Union, which weren't there before, I believe that the fragmentation can be one of the biggest risks, and a more divided Europe will be a weaker Europe in the end of the day. So those I believe are the bigger risks of this new geopolitical shift.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Williams, what role should NATO play if Europe assumes greater responsibility for its own security?
Well, that's the heart of the question. The British want to, and the Germans and NATO, and want to preserve the transatlantic link. But they are realizing that within NATO, the Europeans have to do more. They have to take more responsibility for their own defense, with possibly the United States being a supporter and a supplier of key enablers, with the alliance, transatlantic alliance, being intact. That's what the British and many others would like. The French want a greater degree of autonomy and would be happy to see this autonomy take the form of a greater capability of the European Union. But unfortunately, NATO has a monopoly of multinational military capability in Europe, and it's very, very difficult to proceed with the French vision of something outside Europe, outside NATO, in the short term. And so even the French want to, in the short term, work within NATO, balance within NATO to the two.
Mr. Belgrano, how might changes in US-European relations reshape global security dynamics and definitely the old alliances?
Well, this is a completely new geopolitical scenario. Many analysts are comparing it with a pre-First World War or pre-First World War order, where big powers divide themselves the world, and the Europeans are fragmented, and this generates potential conflicts in the future. So we are seeing a new change, and in many cases they see it as a step back into past international arena. We are now seeing a new imperial or more in an imperial view of the U.S. A new imperial approach in the U.S. The U.S. relates with especially underdeveloped in process to the U.S. moved with Panama, with in a new approach with Latin America. I mean, there's a new approach of the U.S. and the U.S. relates itself directly to big powers such as China, such as Russia. I mean, and it's like and it's moving and it's pushing around the middle-sized, which are not in that kind of imperial level as the U.S. is trying to approach. So I think that we are seeing a new geopolitical shift with a new U.S. and I think that is going to, of course, affect the the international relations between the U.S. and Europe, mainly because this new approach within the U.S. will mainly ignore Europe's concerns and relate directly to these new big and imperial powers that I was mentioning before. So in this case, this direct relationship will bypass Europe, and this will affect their relationships in the end. And also, I think also that this new situation of Europe trying to produce their own defense system will cause a lot of impact in the welfare states that Europe has had in the last decades, because historically the EU didn't use part of its budget to defense, and it used it in welfare. This after the war with the Ukraine and Russia, we saw how I believe that the fragmentation I was mentioning before is going to rather increase rather than being reduced. So I see a relationship between the EU and the US.
But how will that reflect on the world? We'll get back to that. Let me get first to Mr. Williams. And Mr. Williams, if it is feasible for Europe to develop its own strategic deterrent, including nuclear umbrella under French and British leadership, is it possible?
It may be possible. The size of the Russian nuclear capability, 6,000 strategic missiles and so on, or warheads, it makes the task for Europe almost impossible. But the French have offered to discuss the concept of extending its nuclear weapons to the rest of Europe, its umbrella. And so Europe will consider this issue, but I don't think when they realize what it takes to deter Russia in a nuclear sense, then they will be very enthusiastic. In fact, Russia has a huge advantage in these nuclear weapons. the British and the French nuclear weapons don't have anywhere near the capacity to deter Russia, except in a existential threat from Russia. And so this will push the Europeans ever more into reliance on the United States. They will be hoping that after Trump, an American president will revert to the normal Atlantic relationship.
Mr. Brano, what strategic benefits does the US gain from being the primary arms supplier to Europe?
Well, the strategic advantage historically that it had was peace in Europe and the reduction of conflicts in this continent, which was historically part of a conflictive and bloodthirsty war. So I think that the main benefit was having a stable and peaceful continent, which mainly was part of the also increasing economic sphere of the U.S., which was especially in the Cold War, where the two systems were competing with each other for Europe. So I think that the main benefit was having a sphere of influence, what is called the Western Hemisphere, and in the west part of Europe, where they had the continent under its economic, political, and defensive system. So I believe that was part of the main benefits. With having a peaceful Europe was the possibility of having a Europe where you can commerce with and impose economic plans such as the Marshall Plan.
Right.
So I think that
Right. That was Mr. Nicholas Williams, a former NATO official, and Mr. Tobias Belgrano, an international relations researcher. We thank you both, gentlemen, for your valuable insights. And I guess that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.